This is episode 9 with Mike Israetel. Welcome to the Grow podcast with myself, David O'Connor, where my goal is to interview world-class guests so you can constantly progress as a person in terms of your training, your mindset and nutrition. So without further ado, let's dive in. How are we keeping, guys, and welcome back to the Grow podcast. And I know it's been a while since the last episode was recorded, but being away on holidays and with everything else going on, I've finally only gotten around to this now. It's funny too, because I am trying to get a bit more consistent with them, but hopefully down the line that will change. And today I have a guy in the podcast that I highly respect on the fitness world. His name is Mike Israetel, and he has some unbelievable insights all around training volume. Basically, with training volume being one of the keys for muscle growth, Mike's kind of views into what he calls his training volume landmarks. It basically breaks down training volume into ranges to, we'll say, start at, to work up to, and then to hit during periods where, when you're on holidays and whatnot. So even though it is an advanced topic, I wanted to bring Mike on today to break it down to very, very simple to follow terms. So at least you might get a bit more insight into how to progress over a typical training block, for example. And we're going to dive into things like what is training volume, how do you put that in, or where do you start with that in a lot more detail. We touched on this briefly in episode 8 with Steve Hall, and this is actually where I met Mike as well at Steve's conference in London. So yeah, I'm going to stop talking and invite Mike on the podcast. So Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. And Mike, I usually start every podcast with kind of going through a bit of context on who you are first, but then after that I ask, it's more of a challenge for you, so I'm going to ask that first this time. Basically, if you were to describe to me, upon meeting me straight away, in what you do in 10 seconds or less, how would you say that?
I help people become bigger, leaner, faster, stronger.
Nice and short and to the point. Sweet. And yeah, Mike, so then, because this is why I do that first, because now it makes sense to create a bit of context about, so look at who is Mike and kind of how have you got to where we are now, we'll say.
Yeah, well, so, I used to, when I was a kid, when I was 15 years old, I was a wrestler, and I did wrestling in high school. And when I was doing wrestling, I realized that I could get stronger for wrestling if I lifted weights. And I began lifting weights when I was, I think, about 15 years old, and I never really stopped. And then I started to power lift in college. And when I started powerlifting in college, when I started to get stronger, and then there was an objectivity to that strength, it was measured in really distinct numbers and PRs and very sort of exact lifts. There was no way to get around the exactitude of it. And once I started to think of it very objectively, I realized that the best way to try to improve my strength was through science, because now I had a very clear objective. And I knew that when objectives were clear and precision was the goal, science was the best way forward. So I began learning as much science as I could. I changed my major at the university. To reflect that, I began to study kinesiology, or the science of human movement. And then eventually I got my master's degree in strength and conditioning. I worked in New York City as a personal trainer for a while, where I worked with my friend Nick Shaw, who him and I have since gone on to start a company when I was in a PhD program later called Renaissance Periodization. We basically take the scientific approach to helping people get leaner, bigger, stronger, faster, whatever it is they want. And kind of our idea is that, because we had been BS'd so much, and people had told us all this little guru nonsense, little tricks and fads and stuff, we just got really tired of it. So we started a company that tries to help people get in shape without any of that. And we don't promise anything crazy, but we really do promise good results if you can put in the work. And then, our PhD kept growing, and then eventually I finished my PhD, and I began teaching as a professor at various universities. And now RP is a giant machine, and I'm the head science guy, so I have to no longer teach in a university, but I help to run RP full time. And in addition to that, it's not like I gave up training in order to start trying to learn how to train better. I kept training harder and harder the entire time. So I now am involved in bodybuilding as a competitor, and I'm also a competitor in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu grappling. So I'm a sports scientist, and when I say that, I mean both on the educational perspective and real world as well.
Cool. So, yeah, I think it's so many people like it these days as well. They're like, they're still fed the amount of bullshit that is out there, like, and whatnot. But I suppose the science is the biggest thing behind for a lot of people that haven't a clue what we even mean by saying the word science. But for now, if you look from the outside in, if all things are backed in science, then you see the results, you see the experience, and that's why I love kind of everybody I've had in the podcast so far is obviously into the science and whatnot. But look at what I'm kind of getting at, Mike, is it's creating context around this training volume guidelines is why I wanted to mainly get you on and go through that terminology, because I know it and I've obviously read all your stuff and seen you over in London and whatnot. But even before we get into that, what I want you to basically just classify, let's say, what would you reckon a beginner would be in the gym compared to like an intermediate and advanced, because that will just set the scene, I think, perfectly for flowing into the next part then.
You mean like defining what a beginner is?
Yeah, roughly, like just to put some context around that.
Mm-hmm. I think anyone who's been training up to about 3 years is somebody I would call a beginner. There's another term that we've sometimes used. I think we're using a volume concepts book we've got coming out pretty soon, which I'm actually editing right now. I think we use the term novice for somebody that is 0 to 6 months of experience, because from 0 to 6 months, this really, really wacky stuff happens. You part of that you don't really grow much, and then some part of that you grow really fast, and the rules of exercise training can be bent highly within the first 6 months of training. And the funny thing is that most transformation pictures, most results for these stupid juice cleanses and all this other stuff, they're sort of advertised by people who are within their first 6 months of physical training, and they can really just do kind of whatever and still get in shape or improve their shape. But a true beginner, I think, in my eyes, is anyone who's training from between around 6 months of training to about 3 years of training. After about 3 years of training, I think you enter into an intermediate phase, and that's characterized by slightly slower growth, more predictable growth. You can't expect to hit a personal record every single day in training, that sort of thing. Yeah. But beginner is anyone from training from 6 months to about 3 years, and it's really good gains, except you don't start out with very much, so sometimes people don't really notice.
Yeah, because I just think that's where a lot of the listeners are probably going to be, and it's even known as well, kind of the fast gains you can make in that kind of first 6 month period. So cool, yeah. So yeah, Mike, I'm obsessed with the training volume guideline stuff, and I just think it's such a brilliant way to break it down in such an easy to understand format. But like, I suppose the first thing is, when it comes to building muscle, like, why am I even dedicating a whole podcast to training volume? Why is it so important for, let's say, gains, we'll say?
Yeah, I mean, training volume is a really fancy way to say how much should you train. And, that's really important. How much you should train is, people answer a question of training with really absurd answers like train. It's like, okay, like, is 5 minutes a week enough? And they're like, no, that's ridiculous. And you're like, okay, what about 20 hours a week? And they'll go, no, that's ridiculous. And then you go, how do you know that? What is it ridiculous about those two things? So when we're approaching the question of training volume, all training volume is the total amount of physical work that you do in training, usually displayed over the course of a week. So your average, or not average, but total weekly amount of work that you do in your fitness routine, and that's your training volume. And it's just a fancy way of saying how much are you training, because there's a lot of really, really important stuff to learn and a lot of implications about figuring out how much you're training and how much you have to. I can get into a couple of those if you like. There's a very, very, they're very important, because, so I can say, okay, training volume is how much you can train, but you could ask me the next question of why that's important, and I can certainly tell you that.
Yeah, let's go straight into that.
Sure. So there's a couple of ways you can err in training volume that are really just not great, one way you can err, one way you can make a mistake is to train more than what your body can recover from. Recovery is defined as a return to previous abilities. So let's say you could bench, 60 kilos for sets of 5 normally, and then you train, and then a couple days later, because you're still sore and still very tired from that training, you can only bench 55 kilos for sets of 5. You can't do 60 kilos for sets of 5. It would have to be like sets of 3 or 4. So by definition, you are not recovered. Well, if you train so hard and so often and so much that you never recover, you just keep getting worse. And sometimes your body gets into this mode where it doesn't really let you get worse, but it just doesn't let you get any better. So if you train in excess of what we call your maximum recoverable volume, MRV, it's the most training you can do per week approximately and still recover to come back and hit it hard again. If you exceed that just by accident, then you're not going to really get much growth at all or much strength increase. And the really sad irony of that is that the way you exceed your MRV is you do way more work than you're supposed to. So it's really like the worst of both worlds. You're pissing away a ton of time training, could have been spent doing, well, we all have other fun things to do. Training is not the only fun thing. And you also get no results. At least if you're going to get no results, you might as well train very little or not at all. But then again, that's the second way you can screw up your training volume. So the first way is doing too much to get better. The second way is not doing enough. Somebody could tell you that, you buy this, thingy is 5-minute abs or 5-second abs or whatever, right? And you can join some kind of gym that says, hey, we'll get you in shape with just, 2 1-hour workouts per week. And, because you can gain from almost anything at the beginning levels, before about 6 months of training, maybe it works for you. But then after a couple of months later, after a year, 2 or 3 years of training, you notice that you're not making results. All of your gains seem to come within the first 6 months and nothing's happened since then. Well, maybe it's because you're not doing enough. And that's not as sad and ironic as doing too much, but it still sucks because you could have just done more and gotten better results. So, that means by definition you're training under what we call the minimum effective volume, MEV. And that's the smallest amount of volume that you have to do, the smallest amount of training per week that you need to do to get meaningful, noticeable gains. And for some individuals, on some circumstances, that might be as little as 5 working sets per week. Per muscle group, let's say 5 sets of squats just per week will get you bigger legs. Some people that's 10, for some people that's 15 sets. So finding out what that value is for you, or just having an idea that value exists, is a really good start to making sure you're training at least hard enough to grow. And then making sure you don't train harder than your MRV, maximum recoverable volume. What that opens up for you is kind of a golden window, kind of a golden zone, where you're training hard enough to grow, but not so hard that you're not growing anymore. Pretty much anywhere in there you train, and it's a pretty big range for most people, you're going to be okay and going to make some kind of gains. But if you mess it up and go either below or above that for a long time, you're going to really give yourself a really short end of the stick.
Yeah. Obviously it doesn't even apply to, well, not that it doesn't apply, but to a novice stage, them by doing anything, they're going to make progress. They're going to build muscle to get stronger in that first, let's say, 6-month period. But even in that 3-year beginner period, Mike, would this be a big factor in their training? Obviously, probably year 3 to year 1, it will be, but where would you kind of, would say, educate a beginner on this stuff in terms of explaining MRV versus MEV? Because you're saying MEV starts roughly, it could be anywhere from 5 sets a week to 10 sets a week to start off with, and then they ramp it up to their max recoverable over, let's say, 4 to 5 week training block or whatever.
Yeah, so, one thing I can say is that when you start out in training, your minimum effective volume is like a 1 set. You do 1 set per week and you still grow, and that's actually true. But then over the course of the first, 6 months, it probably goes up to around 5 sets per week for most people. So if you put people who've trained at least 6 months on a program that on average gives them less than 5 sets per muscle group per week, like if we have you bench press 3 times a week, but it's just 1 set Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, it's by no means clear that you're going to grow or get stronger from that. It just might not be enough. So for beginners, usually it's somewhere between somewhere around 5 sets on average is where you're going to see minimum effective volumes. But as you get more and more advanced, that minimum effective volumes go up over time until they're actually pretty high. What I would say for beginners is the most important consideration is not to exceed their MRV, because beginners don't have a very high maximum recoverable volume. They're not really in good shape. Their recovery systems aren't well trained. So it's pretty easy for them to exceed their maximum recovery abilities and just stall out for a while or get hurt, because a lot of times when you're not recovered and you're still pounding away at your body, you actually start to cause physical damage to tissues, and then that's really not good. So what ends up happening is, people start training and they get really excited about training. They see progress, they see change, they fall in love with the idea, and then they go, well, geez, if I'm getting really good results with 10 sets a week per body part, maybe I'll do 20 or 30. And then they do too much, they get really, really big problems. There's a psychological component as well, that when you're doing too much physical training, you tend to undergo psychological burnout more likely. So some people who train way too hard in the first couple of years just quit training because they're so tired of it, they're so sick of it, and they never come back or come back much later, and that's really not good. The thing is, because beginners have really low minimum effective volumes, they don't need to do much to grow some. It's good for them to err on the side of less. As they get more advanced over the years, they get a better feel for their body, and as their minimum effective volumes start to rise, then they can really start to kind of push the envelope a little more. But my best advice for beginners would be to start at a number of sets per week that definitely gets you growth just by a little, and over time, over the weeks, add a set here and there until you're doing lots of sets per week and you start to feel really tired and your performance starts to become questionable, right? You maybe stop hitting PRs, or you're not really getting stronger week to week. Then you probably hit your maximum recoverable volume. It's a good idea to take a deload, which is an intentionally very easy, much lighter week of training. Really let that fatigue come down, and then go all the way back in that next week to what you think your minimum effective volume is, and maybe 6 or 7 sets a week. And then slowly over the course of the weeks build up, add weight to the bar, 2.5 to 5 kilos to the bar, try to keep the same reps or more or less, and add a set or two every week to every training day so that you do more and more volume throughout the weeks. The cool thing about beginners is because they don't accumulate fatigue as fast, they're not lifting objectively as heavy weights or doing as much work, and because of their adaptive capacities and their minimum effective volumes are so high, that process of week to week increasing weight on the bar and increasing sets done can last for 8 to 12 weeks for beginners before they really need a deload. Now, the thing is, it's a really big caveat comes with this. It's all personal. Some individuals that are bigger and stronger, they need to deload more often because they can do more damage to themselves. So it's not one of these ego things where you're like, well, Dr. Israetel said beginners need to deload every 8 to 12 weeks. I'm pretty beat up. I think I should deload. It's only week 6. Damn it, I should keep going because I want to be tough, No, it's actually not a sign of toughness at all. Some of the toughest people who are stronger than everyone actually need to deload more often. So you have to listen to your body, and more particularly, you have to look at your performance. If you're no longer making gains, you need to deload, and you need to do it ASAP. And deloads feel weird. It feels like you're not doing much, but remember, you're letting the fatigue drop off. It's like asking the question of, what's the purpose of a vacation in the context of making you a better employee at your job? Well, the vacation doesn't directly make you better at your work. I mean, you're not doing Microsoft Excel on your vacation, I hope. But because it lets you relax and de-stress, it takes away all of your fatigue and your worries and your hang-ups about work, and it erases them so that you come back to work, you're fresh and awesome, and you can be super productive, just the same way the deload works. And how often you need a vacation is a personal thing, and so is the deload. So be honest with yourself. Slowly increase how much weight you're using in exercises. Slowly increase how many sets you're using per week. And when you start to hit your limits, deload, come back down to the minimum effective volume, and then repeat the cycle. And you just cycle through. And after years and years, you're jacked and lean and probably have more friends and just you're the life of the party. You're like a regular Batman, Bruce Wayne.
No,
that last part's a joke. Maybe.
You've explained that perfectly, Mike, because it's fairly easy to understand in concept. Like, you start and you build up, and then you may need to back off, because I don't know about yourself, but I see two big extremes. I might have some people that they're constantly training around or even below their MEV, their minimum effective volume, you could say. And then you have the other extreme where they're literally they're following some Instagram guys, or they're following X, Y, or Z, and they're telling them to do fucking sets upon sets of everything throughout the week, and they're never taking a deload because they don't even understand what it does or whatnot. So, no, that's great, because it creates a lot of context around around what it's meant to do. So, in between them, Mike, we have minimum effective volume, we have maximum recoverable volume. What else is there? There's you have maintenance volume there, you have maximum adaptive volume. If we can dive into those small bit.
Sure. So maximum adaptive volume is really a question of, okay, so we know that the minimum effective volume is the least amount of work you need to do to improve. Maximum recoverable volume is the most amount of work you can tolerate and still not get worse, recovering to your earlier performance. Neither one of those really answers the question of how much we should train by themselves, because how much we should train is actually very straightforward. It's called your maximum adaptive volume, and it is the amount of work you need to do to get better at the fastest rates. And that's very simple. Maximum adaptive volume, the volume at which you get maximal adaptations, right? So just for a very, very pure hypothetical scenario, if your minimum effective volume is 10 sets per week and your maximum recoverable volume is 20 sets per week, maybe in your case, your maximum adaptive volume might average around 15 sets per week. It's that really, really golden zone where most of your training should average. But the trippy thing is, and we've actually just written an unbelievable amount on this in the volume book that we're coming out with, is that maximum adaptive volume isn't really a distinct number. It's not really even a distinct range. It's a really wide range. One of the really important reasons why it's a really wide range is that whatever you do in training this week to grow the most or to get the strongest, the overload principle automatically says that whatever that was this week, it should be more next week, because overload says that you have to keep increasing the stimulus to see results, right? So if we say our maximum adaptive volume is 15 sets per week, let's say we do 15 sets per week on week 1. Sweet, we got the most growth we could have. Awesome. And then next week we do another 15 sets. But hold on a second. 15 sets isn't enough now. The overload principle says we need to do more, and more doesn't just mean more weight, and especially in hypertrophy, muscle growth, it means more volume, more sets. So that if we do 15 again, assuming that's our maximum adaptive volume, it's no longer. Now 16 or 17 is our maximum adaptive volume. After we do 16 or 17 sets, 18 or 19 sets is our maximum adaptive volume, and with more weight. So if you look at it logic that way, it's really hard to pin down exactly what the maximum adaptive volume is. There's a couple of other reasons why it's a big range. One is that when you choose new exercises, new sets, and new reps, switch things up between different phases of training, between different mesocycles, right? When up, deload, up, deload, each one of those is called a mesocycle. And between those phases of training, when you switch things up, your body's not used to those new changes, so it actually needs less total work to get the same kind of muscle growth effect. So maybe instead of your maximum adaptive volume being 15 sets per week, it might be like 12 sets per week at the beginning of a mesocycle because you're not used to the stuff. When you factor in the account that deloading is a very easy week and it lowers your fitness levels and it makes you really sensitive to muscle growth, your maximum adaptive volume might move down even further to 11 sets per week. When you factor in another thing, that momentum building and practicing movements when they're light does you really a world of good when they get heavier, because it allows you to be more productive, more efficient during heavy training. It does build the logic to say that maybe it's a good idea to start even a little less than usual so we can catch more momentum on our way up to the bigger set numbers and bigger weights. And then all of a sudden your maximum adaptive volume starts right around your minimum effective volume at the beginning of a mesocycle. Now on the other end, we could just take our maximum adaptive volume, go all the way up to about the middle range of volume, halfway to our MRV, deload and repeat. But we got a couple of questions to ask. Why the heck are we deloading? We've got so much momentum built up. We still have a lot of benefits to collect. We still have a lot of strength and size to collect. And This is a little bit more true for advanced individuals than it is for beginners, but it's nonetheless true for everyone to some extent. You get a lot of really good gains and different kinds of gains, more permanent gains, when you train at the very exotic extremes of your abilities. So that as you approach MRV, that kind of training tends to disrupt your tissues and your physiological systems so much that the disruptions tend to leave permanent marks of adaptation. One of those is that parts of your muscle cells that don't normally do anything integrate into the parts that do. They're called satellite cells. And that probably tends to happen during pretty extreme training, not normal training. So it turns out that if we're trying to say that maximum adaptive volume is just the middle ground, after a really extensive analysis, that's not true. Maximum adaptive volume, on average, is the entire range of training volumes from minimum effective volume all the way to maximum recoverable. There's a couple of other reasons I left out because some of them can get a little complicated, and also just for the issues of time. But I will say this. The idea of a maximum adaptive volume is intellectually very interesting and very important. But the reality is that really is the entire range between minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable. So that when you're training, most of your training cycles that are productive should start at the least amount that you can do to grow and end at the most, and then recycle and repeat. I hope that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. Like, I think when you stated the overload principle, it makes a lot more sense when you obviously talk about that, and as well, even the psychological aspect of it too. It's nice to be able to start, let's say, at a lower set range and work up over a month, and it seems logical, and people get it a lot easier too, rather than just kind of staying at the same sets and reps every single week. But again,
for sure,
obviously that depends on the main overall goal. Look, are you building muscle or is it just strength or powerlifting you're doing? And Mike, I know it's probably doesn't even apply to beginners as well, but or even if you're going on holidays or that kind of stuff, vacation, what about maintenance volume? And it's actually something I tied with over in America 2 weeks back myself. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So maintenance volume. Also, forgive my voice. I'm actually a little bit sick right now. I normally don't sound like a zombie. Well, maybe I do.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. So the maintenance volume is the least amount of work you can do and not lose what you've gained. It's a very different thing than the least amount of work you can do and gain. Right? It's the least work you can do and still not lose. When you look at it like that, you just define it. A lot of your listeners are probably thinking right now, like, that's kind of stupid. Who the hell wants to do that? Right? What a loser goal of like, well, I just don't want to lose anything, right? Why not gain? But the thing is, sometimes it's not a good idea to gain, or it's unrealistic to gain. And then all of a sudden, you start thinking about, okay, maybe I do need to know my maintenance volume. For example, you already led the way with this perfect example. You're going on a holiday. You guys call it holiday over there or vacation?
Holiday, yeah. I actually was listening to...
vacation doesn't make any...
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast with Danny on this yesterday, Danny Lennon, so you were talking about the same thing, so that's funny you brought it up.
Yeah, there you go. So, when you're on holiday, then, you've got better things to do maybe than lift weights or than train for a marathon or whatever it is you're doing to stay in shape. Maybe you don't. Maybe you like to train, but your spouse might not like to train as much. Your in-laws or something, wherever you're going on a family trip, you've got children. They want to go to Disney World. They don't really, you're not going to do reps with Goofy and Mickey Mouse or something. That'd be pretty sweet though if you picked up the people dressed in costumes and started curling them and stuff. But sometimes you're not able to dedicate as much energy and time to training, so the question doesn't automatically turn into one of, okay, because there's a lot of really faulty all or nothing thinking. They'll say things like, well, if I can't train hard, why bother training at all? And you see this kind of stuff on Facebook and on Instagram, and it's really ridiculous. So people say this. They're actually, so when they say things like that, a lot of times they're trying to virtue signal, right? They're trying to literally say, I'm such a tough person and I'm so committed and robotic. My follow through is so great that either I'm training my balls off or I'm not training at all. And we're supposed to get up and clap for these people like, wow, you're such a hero. But the reality of the matter is that if you have that philosophy, every time you go on holiday, every time you can't train for whatever reason, let's say work starts to get really busy. There's another example. Your work is like, hey, listen, we got these projects to finish. Let's say you work in vehicle design or some part of the car manufacturing process. And they say, look, we've got, the London Auto Show coming up in late October. And we got to work our butts off to make sure we have all our vehicles ready for that show. So for the next 6 weeks, prepare to be here up to 10 or 12 hours a day. And you're like, okay, that sucks. And then all of a sudden you don't have time to train nearly as much as you did. So what are you going to do? Say, well, I guess I'm just going to lose all the gains I've got so far or lose a bunch of them? No. Are you going to say, well, if I can't train hard, there's no point in training at all? That's ridiculous. What you would say intellectually is, I wonder how little training I have to do to not make any gains, because that's not going to be realistic, but to at least keep what I've got. And the really, really cool thing, especially as you get more advanced, but definitely for beginners as well, we found out that maintenance volume is really not as high as you would expect. And it's usually much lower than the amount of volume you need to actually make gains, even lower than minimum effective volume. So what does that mean? That's really good news. It means that for most individuals, for beginners especially, 6 to 8 sets per muscle group per week is enough to keep gains, especially if that training is heavy, maybe between 5 and 8 repetitions per set. That's enough to keep gains for literally months on end. So if you go on holiday and you can get to the gym only 2 times a week and do like 5 sets of heavy squats, 5 sets of pulls or bent rows of some kind, and 5 sets of some kind of incline press or something, maybe do a little BS arm and shoulder work, that's a 1.5 hour workout. If you can make that workout twice within a week, you kept all your muscle for that week. Are you going to grow? No, you're not, but you're not going to lose. How big of a difference does it make to come back from a 6-week holiday having the same amount of muscle as you used to? And it'll look a little smaller because you'll lose a little bit of a pump, but that's just intramuscular water. As soon as you do your first week of normal training, you're going to balloon back up and be like, oh my God, I'm as big as I ever was. How much better is it to come back after 6 weeks having lost nothing versus having lost like 3 kilos of muscle? I mean, that's 3 kilos you're going to have to get back. And the good news is it's not that hard to get back lost muscle, but it's still time you're pissing away where you could have been getting new gains. So maintenance volume, whether or not you're getting ready for a big project at work, you can't train that much, or you're on holiday, or 50 other different applications, it's good to know because then you can just maintain. It's not very much training. It's way less than you would expect. And it's almost kind of like, if you've ever been in the ocean, when you get hit with the big wave, it takes you, up to the shore, and then the kind of the backdraft takes you back. You don't have to try to swim against the wave that takes you back. All you have to do is dig your feet and dig your hands into the sand and hold. So as that wave is dragging everybody back, you're holding. And then when the next wave comes and hits you forward, you go forward. And when the next wave drags you back, all you do is hold. So if during holidays and during difficult times at work or with life, you're just holding, it's okay. You don't have to make gains because you'll make gains when the times are good for training again. And that way you make constant progress. And after years of training, you're going to look something different and perform something different versus someone who every time something came up, they had the all or nothing mentality. They didn't know about maintenance volume. And they said, well, geez, if I can't train 6 hours a day or whatever, or let's say, 6 days a week for 2 hours at a time, it's not even worth it. Those individuals tend to have a lot of ups and downs and over the years don't accrue as much muscle, strength, fitness, whatever, as individuals who know that there's a time to go hard and a time to hold their position, so to speak.
No, that all or nothing mentality, it does throw a massive spanner in the works for people because we see it daily here, but the biggest thing we're trying to kind of flip the switch in their head is obviously making them see the bigger picture and not kind of like just 1 or 2 weeks in isolation. And it does help a bit, but no, it's good that you brought that up, Mike, because it is a big factor in people making fuck all progress as the time goes on.
For sure. What do you think is the back? Why? What's up with the all or nothing thing? Where do you feel with your clients and people you're around? Where does that come from? The all or nothing idea? Is it like an ego thing? What is it? What do you think?
I have seen it with ego in the past, yeah, definitely. But I think, well, just from talking to a lot of our clients, like, it's something that's ingrained in them for such a young age that when they're in their 20s and late 30s, it's so subconsciously ingrained into them, they don't even question it anymore. It's just like, and they say it to you. They're like, oh no, if I can't do it, I won't do it at all. And when I can do it, I'm going to go fucking 100%. So like, even this week, and literally half an hour before I came on the podcast, we were finishing up with our groups, one of their second sessions of the week, upper body focus mainly, and we had roughly everything around 3 sets because it's a big deal all the week, whereas last week we went to town and it was just sets upon sets.
Excellent.
And some of them just find it so hard sometimes to hold back, even though they know that they feel like shit this week, or their fatigue is starting to drop now. But some of them, you know, they know that the weight is they're not lifting as much as they were last week, but that still doesn't tell them to pull back. They're still in their head, they're like, I need to push. I don't know, I think it's just, in Ireland especially, it's like we get so many people coming from other gyms, Mike, that have just been pounded every week. Like, and literally then at the end of a session they're being pounded, like a lower body session, they'll put them on a prowler and make them puke. And like, we've had those people like come in here and we're like, fucking hell. And then you have another...
Yeah, I guess they think that the harder the better is probably what they think.
Yeah.
And if you're not training max about, you're not getting the best results.
Or if you're not dripping in pools of sweat, you're not making progress. But yeah, it's...
for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint it, like, but as I say, we have changed people, but again... you have to be very, very careful around the person you're talking to, because they could get defensive, and you know, and it's, what's his name? Is it
for sure
Bart or Brett Barthol? What the hell is his name? I'm gonna butcher it. Anyhow, his book is called Conscious Coaching. It was out recently. I've one of my coaches at the gym here is reading that lately, and he was telling us about the different archetypes in the book and how to coach people differently depending on their psychology and outlook on things. But it really helped with that kind of stuff, and just how you would explain something to them rather than just telling them up front. And that kind of slowly but surely makes them change their perspective and realise, oh, if I do it this way, I'll make better progress. But sometimes people can't see that, so you have to just kind of break it down in another way for them, you know.
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And Mike, I was going to touch on some intensity stuff, but I don't think I'm going to bother going off on that tangent because we're on a good loop here with the training volume guidelines. And the question I have is then, if I'm not making progress, let's just say my quads aren't growing, is it as simple as I'm just not doing enough volume?
No, because you could be doing too much, right? That's the big key, and that's one of the cool... You know, when my colleague, Dr. James Hoffman, and I, when we really started giving these concepts a lot more thought, we realized that there's a lot of implications for modifying training that unfortunately make modifications more complicated, but fortunately make them more complicated because with complication, that means we have multiple solutions and pathways to an answer. The cool thing about simple solutions is that they're easy to apply. The bad thing about simple solutions is that when they don't work, you're pretty well fucked because you have no idea what else to do, right? If you've got one solution for driving and that's step on the gas, when stepping on the gas isn't winning your races, you know, you only really do one thing. So the cool thing about complexity is that when it's necessary, it can really give you a roadmap or a pathway to finding out what's really wrong and then working on that. So when you're not growing, it's by no means clear that the answer is you need to do more. Because with the idea of the maximum recoverable volume especially, and minimum effective volume, you potentially could be on two sides of that spectrum. One, you could be doing not enough. Two, you could be doing too much. So the reality of the matter is trying to find out which one of those it is first, and then solving that problem. And generally speaking, that's not a terribly difficult thing to do, but it has to be done, and again, ego is going to bump into it. So for example, let's say you're training quads with 15 working sets per week on average. They're not growing. Let's just for a second assume nutrition is taken care of, right? Because a lot of the reasons people don't grow is they're not eating enough, and there's no amount of training is going to get you help with that. So let's say you've got, your quads aren't really growing, and they should be, but you're doing 15 sets a week. Because it's actually potentially dangerous injury-wise and chronic wear and tear-wise to go over your MRV very far for long, we don't want to assume that training more is what you need. So the first thing I would say as a professional is to go down in training volume. Deload, and then start with 10 sets a week and just do every week at 10 sets, but increase the intensity. If you start growing, well, the answer was probably 15 was too much for you. It was really close to or over your MRV, right? Then you knew the answer. Then you can deload after a couple of weeks of that, start at maybe 6 or 8 sets a week for quads, move up to about 12 to 14, deload, repeat, and that's how your mesocycles are going to go for a while. And you've unlocked the fact that you've been doing too much. But on the other hand, if you go to 10 for a couple of weeks and you're noticing that you're getting even smaller, now you have a problem, but you know a solution to it. So then you go back up to 15, then you go to 17, 19, something like that. And as you creep over 20, you're going to start to notice more growth. And then you're going to go, oh, well, geez, looks like I was under training. And then maybe from then on, you can train somewhere between 15 and 25 sets per week. And it looks like, you have a really high volume tolerance. That's totally cool. But you don't know which one of those it is until you really give them a shot. And I think that just assuming more is better is always the answer. It's only the answer maybe like half the time, right? Half the time, that sucks. If you get a 50% grade in a class, you don't graduate. So 50% is not good enough. We want 100%. So we want to take a low-end guess first. The good thing about a low-end guess is if you have any nagging wear and tears and injuries, they heal because of the low volume. So the worst case is you lose a little bit of muscle size, but probably don't lose any because you'll probably just be at your maintenance volume, and just nothing will happen, but you'll get nice and recovered, your joints will feel better, and then you'll be ready to go super hard if needed. But if it really was, over your MRV or around your MRV that you used to be training, going less is going to make you grow a lot more. You just made a really sweet discovery. You don't have to train as much as you thought you did to grow as much as you wanted, right? That's really cool. People say they like to train, and training's great, but imagine finding out that you can do half of what you've been doing and grow even more. I mean, that's probably really great news. It's probably better news than being like, hey, you want to grow, but you got to do double what you're doing now. Like, geez, like there goes my family time, my relaxation time. I'm just home training at the gym all the time. So it's a good idea, I think, to start at the lower end, see how that goes, and if it doesn't go well, try the higher end.
Yeah, I think the key in overall that too is to track the fucking thing just to see where actually you're at, because you'd be surprised, and even though we have our guys tracking all their training logs here and stuff, they have to force feed them to remind them to write down stuff. So yeah, it's okay for myself and yourself, Mike. Man. We'd expect people to track this stuff, but you'd be amazed. Like, and I'm back.
Well, I totally agree with that. Really quick, actually, if I can. Yeah. I actually just made a social media post about a very related topic. As a personal trainer and as a fitness coach, when people tell you they're not making progress, you have to re-ask that question. You have to dig a little deeper. I actually just literally recently stopped taking people at their word when they say they're not making progress. I know it sounds bad. I can explain. So people say I'm not making progress. You go, okay, so and I usually just use the trick wording. I go, so how much progress have you made over the last month? And if it's fat loss, they'll say, I've only lost 4 or 5 pounds of fat, or 2 to 3 kilos. Or if it's weight on the bar, they'll say, my squat has only gone up by 10 kilos in the last 2 months. And you go, you're very calm. You got to be not sarcastic, like I'm going to be now for entertainment purposes. But a part of me wants to say, really, 10 kilos in 2 months, that's not progress for you. And what they're really doing is either comparing it to somebody else in the gym that's got totally different genetics or trains way more, eats way more, is way bigger, or they're comparing it to their old selves when they used to gain, beginner noob gains. And they're no longer getting them, but there's no way to ever get them again because, you don't get such great gains unless you're just starting out. So when people say, well, I'm not making progress, I don't ever really believe people up front that they're saying that they're doing that. It turns out that they're doing just fine. At Renaissance Periodization with the diet templates, we have these, diet programs that people can download, and they really just take you through a whole diet automatically. And people say, I'm not losing weight. And we'll say, well, how much weight are you losing? And they'll usually say a number back that's not like, very few people get irritated and go, no, I told you I wasn't losing any. Didn't you hear me? They'll say, I only lost like 5 pounds last month. So we have to remind them, like, well, that's really good. And they're like, oh, I thought I was supposed to be losing more. And then we say, where did you come up with that? And they're like, I don't know. So I think a lot of times, when that person, just to come back to the earlier point, says, my quads aren't growing. My next question is, so how much have they grown in the last couple of months? I'll say, well, they've gotten pretty big, but like, I think they can get better. And it's like, that's not the same thing as not growing, damn it. I wouldn't bring this point up if it didn't happen to me all the time. Do you ever get stuff like that?
Yeah. Especially on the weight loss, because they're...
Oh my God.
Yeah, like, it's sure, I know America is the same stuff, like Biggest Loser USA and all that kind of stuff. People would be comparing to that, or we have a few places around here that just they follow a very restrictive diet or whatever it is, and they're losing pounds upon pounds a week, and then they're wondering why 2 months later they're not using the same. And that's what they're comparing to, which is they don't appreciate how much a pound of fat actually is, which is it's daft, but no, we do definitely. And again, it's bringing it back to a perspective where we're not making them feel belittled by it and trying to say, oh, but sure, I'm cool, you know nothing. Do that kind of way. We have to be we're very, very careful.
Totally.
Basically, lately, and how we get that point across is the easiest way to put it, Mike. But this leads perfectly into my next question, and it's more for myself, but it's one that I got off two guys on Snapchat today as well, asking me about it. What's the story when it comes to trying to progress when you're playing a sport and the sport is priority? So I suppose if we have GAA, it's called, it's a Gaelic Athletic Association here in Ireland, and under that you have football, which is basically soccer, but you're allowed to use it in your hands, and then you have hurling, which is like lacrosse on another up a level. If the sport is priority, Mike, what would be your recommendations? We'll say when you're not in the middle of the most important training time of the year for your sport.
Yeah, well, I think you already gave away a part of the answer, and that first part is make sure you have a phasic, periodized approach to your training, which means that when it's the most important time for you to be competitive at sport, when you have playoffs or league championships or whatever, don't train very hard in your weight room activities, because that's going to fatigue the shit out of you and it's going to ruin your performance on the field of play. So number one is the several months of highly competitive season, train at basically maintenance volume only. Right now that we have these terms, this is a really easy conversation. Right? So maintenance volume only during the season. In the off season, you have to make a calculated decision. You have to say, so there's the potential, there's the minimum effective volume for weight training, and there's the maximum recoverable, all the way to the maximum recoverable volume. Okay, so we have those two extremes of value. Fine. In an ideal world, we'd go all the way up to a maximum recoverable every now and again, because we would, not have all these sports to tire us out and to interfere with performance. But because we know that our weight training tires us out for sport and vice versa, what we're going to do is start our mesocycles at minimum effective volume and go up to our new maximum recoverable volume, which includes our sport into consideration. What's maximum recoverable volume including our sport? It means that we're not just looking at weight room performance to see if we've hit our MRV. We're looking at field performance in our sport. Once we start to get slow and sluggish and we're really having trouble improving in the sport, we know that we're training too much in the weight room as well as too much in the sport. Because sport is a priority, we're not going to cut our sport training. We're going to look back to the weight room. We're going to deload. We're going to go back to minimum effective volume and then slowly build back up. So you may only get 2/3 of the way up through to your MRV or to your old MRV, but you have to cut it off there because any more training would start to really seriously impede your performance training. Does that mean that you have to leave the gym every day, every week, knowing you could have done more to grow muscle and to get stronger? Yes. But does that mean that you basically are willingly making that trade-off because you know that it's going to be better in the long term because it's going to allow you to be a good athlete at your sport? Yes. If you are no longer comfortable making that trade-off, sounds like you got to quit sport and start going full-time training. If you no longer comfortable making that trade-off because you really value sport preparation, then you need to decrease your weight volumes even more and start redesigning a weight training program around what's going to make you the best at sport, not just what makes you good in the gym. So for a lot of these sports, that means a lot of arm training and ab training and calf training is just going to go out the window almost completely. And now you're training mostly Olympic weightlifting derivatives and other explosive moves and basic strength moves that make you better at sport as opposed to better at, being a gym bro. So.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've struggled with myself over the last couple of years. Like I just want the best of both worlds, and I need to cop the fuck on, is the easiest way to put it. Even this week, we're back. Yeah. We're back into what's called championship in probably 4 or 5 weeks, and this is my last high volume block this week. But I couldn't. I was scheduled to do 5 and 6 sets for all leg exercises I had this week. But I had to cut it off at 4 for basically everything because I'm just so hammered from the pitch. And so what I'm doing this week I'm pushing upper volume and getting the baseline in for my lower, and then next week's a deload, and then after that I'm handing my training programming over to one of the coaches in the gym, and he's just going to say, here, just do that. So yeah, but no,
that definitely helps because then your ego doesn't get in the way as much, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting too though that you recommend to train around the maintenance volume. I actually, in my head, I was kind of going to do a bit more, but that's kind of maybe rethinking now a bit. But yeah, cool.
Well, no, you might be able to do more, but the thing is really, the question is how much do you want to win?
Yeah.
If you want to win a lot, then maintenance volume it is. If you want to do okay, then you might be able to go up to minimum effective. But listen, every time your team loses a point or the other team scores or you couldn't quite catch the guy that you were supposed to be defending because your legs were just a little sore and a little tired and you lost a goal for your team, know that that's a trade-off you made, and you could have made that trade-off the other way. There's something liberating about giving everything you can to a sport without any trade-offs, because even when you lose, there's a comfort in that loss knowing, you know what, fuck, I did everything I could. I'm going to be happy about this. And when you win, obviously, whatever, that's great either way. But when you lose with a trade-off, you got to think back to yourself, well, shit, if I trained less in the weight room, we could have been winners today. But if you're okay with that trade-off fundamentally, then you say, hey, that's okay to me. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I mostly do bodybuilding. So when I don't do as well in Jiu-Jitsu as I could hope, I know it's because of my bodybuilding training. I'm okay with that because I made that choice. But it's all about sitting down, thinking what trade-offs you really want.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too. How do you find juggling the both?
It sucks. Bodybuilding beats you to death, and it makes jiu-jitsu very hard because you're tired and sore, but it's not anywhere close to the other way around because jiu-jitsu literally breaks you, and it makes you fatigued in really weird ways you would never think. It makes your joints hurt, and it really interferes with bodybuilding training as well. So it's one of those things where people ask me how to make the two compatible, and there's some cool tricks. I actually have a really good video on YouTube about balancing weight training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's really easily searchable. Just type in my last name and BJJ and it'll come up. It's like an hour and 15 minutes of technicalities and how to integrate the two. But the fundamental reality is it's a big trade-off for both. I would be much better at Jiu-Jitsu if I wasn't lifting weights all the time, and I would be much better at bodybuilding if I wasn't doing Jiu-Jitsu. It just so happens that I love both sports so much, I'm not willing to give either one of them up. So I kind of have to be the guy at the bodybuilding show that can beat everybody up and the most jacked looking guy at Jiu-Jitsu, but that doesn't really give you any points. You don't win any contests on that. Yeah. So, but to me, it's what makes me happy. So I've come to peace with it. But that doesn't mean it's the right solution. Some individuals may have so much to give to one sport that they don't want to trade off, and I think that's totally cool.
No, definitely. I'll throw that video in the show notes page for this anyway, so people can get onto that if they want to see it.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
But okay, yeah, I think it's time to start rounding things up. I can't believe there's over nearly 55 minutes gone already. Let me see. Yeah, I had a few bits and bobs, Mike, but there's no point in even bringing them up because we don't have time. But yeah, no, I think the training volume guidelines, that's the key I wanted to get from this. So I hope the listeners can understand as well as I did from that. So thank you for that, Mike. And just your book, yeah, what's the story with that?
So I'm, currently editing the book. After I'm done editing it, probably next week, it goes off to people who edit it for spelling and grammar. They take about a week or two with it, and then it goes off to our digital product creator who makes it fancy and makes it look like an ebook. Then we look at that for a couple more weeks. So I think sometime September, October, late September, probably early October, we're going to have that book out. And it's, going to be called, the exact name isn't yet to be decided, but it's going to be about the volume landmarks. It's going to be a very, very long book. It's probably going to be, to the tune of 200 pages plus. And it's going to be all about MRV, MEV, MV, and tons of implications, exact kind of very technical definitions, tons of graphs and all this other stuff to really get people thinking about these sorts of things. And we're very likely going to co-release that book with a book we've been working on for quite some time, the recovery book. So we're going to write a book. It's almost complete, and it's just got to go through editing now. It's recovering from training. Everything you need to know from the theoretical basis of what recovery is and why it's important, all the way through practical recommendations of, okay, I want to recover as much as possible. What do I do? How do I sleep? How do I eat? What supplements do I take? Is it a good idea to ice, to rest, to heat? All this other stuff. My colleague, Dr. James Hoffman, he's really just a world expert on recovery, and he's going to, we're going to beat it to death. So that's going to be a massive book. That book's probably going to be like 400 pages. We're probably going to co-release the books, and it'll be a lot of cool learning and a lot of theory, but also a lot of practical stuff. The volume concepts is going to be tough read. It's going to be theoretical, very difficult, but really cool. The recovery book is going to be an easier read. It's going to get technical at times, but it's going to have a ton of real-world applications. If anyone buys that and reads it, they're going to learn how to recover, how to sleep better, how to eat better in order to make sure their training is going as well as possible.
Yeah, I definitely have them on my to-do list in there for sure. I love the Renaissance diet book as well, and I'm actually currently reading through the other one by the guys at Juggernaut, the strength training manual. You had an input in that as well, didn't you? I've seen your name in that.
Where's
the strength training one.
Which book exactly?
Is it called that? 1 second.
Scientific Principle?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, that was a big book. Enjoy.
Yeah. Well, I'm currently going through that now at the moment. So yeah, Mike, I know this probably seems a bit weird, but we're in August right now. When I started the podcast first, it was like February, and I always rounded it off by asking the guests what was the biggest lesson or biggest takeaway you had from the year previous. So if you can think back that far, I'm just going to keep it rolling because I've done it for every podcast, but what was your biggest lesson from 2016, if you could pinpoint one?
Holy crap. I'm really not sure. I don't keep track of years in my head, to be honest.
Yeah. Or even like the last... last few months, like if anything.
Sure. Yeah. I think that for me, a big lesson is that if you do a good job at whatever it is you're trying to do, I think that happiness and fulfillment is just around the corner. And that if you're looking for happiness or fulfillment without trying to do a good job at your work or at school or with your family, then where you're looking is probably going to be a waste of your time until you take care of the most important thing. So if someone said to me that they were kind of lost and not super happy and didn't know what was going on with their life and they were kind of losing purpose, my first question would be like, how is your job and how is your family? Are you putting in the necessary work into those things to feel like you're doing good and feel like you're doing your best or close to it? And if they say no, then I would tell them that's what to work on. And if for most people that I talk to that are putting in their their heart into what they do, they don't ever really have issues nearly as often with feeling happy or fulfilled or anything like that. So I think that's my big lesson.
That is brilliant, because I can wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah, no, 100%, Mike. I think fulfillment wasn't something that I didn't even have a clue about until it kind of happened, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, when I first opened the gym, basically, like, it's just like it really is everything at the end of the day. Like, and no, that's brilliant that you brought that up. So, a nice way to round it off. Mike, I'm going to have your book, video, details, all that kind of stuff in the show notes. But is there anything else you want me to add to that page, or where can people find you the best, I suppose?
Yeah, totally. So Instagram at RP Strength. And that's where Renaissance Periodisation, the company that I co-founded, we've got all kinds of really cool stuff happening on Instagram, and all kinds of cool products and services and articles and this and that and transformation photos. So if you get on RP Strength on Instagram, it's a party 100% of the time.
Yeah, I stopped. I was in stitches laughing at a post you put up the last day. What was it? Was it something to do with Star Wars or something? I can't even remember. I think it was.
So on Instagram, I'm at RP Dr. Mike. You can come laugh with me. I put on a lot more jokes, and then RP Strength is also some humor and some good stuff. So yeah, my stuff's a little less politically incorrect. So if you follow me, Mike Israetel on Facebook and at RP DRMIKE on Instagram. I hope you're just not easily offendable, and if you are, I'm sorry in advance.
Yeah. Oh, stop. It was, I have to bring this up now because I don't know if you remember, but we were just getting back into the conference from a break in London, and everyone had just sat down, and you remember the room, it was packed, like there was literally no chairs left anywhere, and beside us there was like some other conference going on, and it was to me it looked like there was people in their 50s and 60s and 70s in that room, all wearing suits and dresses and everything. And one lady came back in to our room by an accident when you were talking, and
yeah, it
was just before you actually got back into the presentation, so everyone was just kind of chatting and getting ready, and I haven't a clue what you were talking about, but some guy in the audience was talking. I think you were talking about two men having intercourse.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and something was said about anal sex, and next thing the two of you were laughing, and like the rest of the room wasn't laughing, which it probably made her think like, what the fuck is going on in here? Next thing she just stood up slowly and walked out, and only like 4 or 5.
Oh my god, that poor lady.
Yeah, only like 4 or 5 was seated, and I just thought it was the funniest thing ever, because I was thinking in her head, she's in a room full of jacked people and they're talking about anal sex. I think, where the fuck is she? Oh my God.
You know, man, depending on her proclivity, she walked into the very right room. But unfortunately, it was all jokes, so she would have been highly disappointed.
Oh, stop! I couldn't stop laughing at that. But like,
who knows? Hey, man, who knows? Who knows what was in the other room? Maybe she was there for actual like illicit activities. She sat down with us and she's like, oh, look at all these muscular men. And then all we're doing is talking about hypertrophy. And she's like, this is boring as hell. I'm leaving. I'm going back to have anal sex in the other room. And that's what it was rented for.
Oh, my God. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on, buddy. And I hope that cold...
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
I hope that cold clears up soon. ASAP.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll chat to you soon. Bye-bye.
So if I knew that Mike was dying with a cold, I probably would have cancelled on him, but he even told me there as well after the podcast, like he wasn't going to cancel and give up, but just because the cold was going to get in the way. So it's nice to see that passion as well pouring out, like just for the people that don't know him, like. But anyhow, all the show notes will be on Doc Fitness Online /episode 9. And as always, if you have any questions, I have a little link there to my Instagram channel. It's at the Doc Fitness. It's THEDOC Fitness. If you want to ask me any questions over there, because that's where I get each idea for the podcast. And I have a couple of guests lined up next for the podcast. I'm just not sure who's up next with clashing schedules overseas and that kind of stuff. But we will be diving into some warm stuff around GAA and for lifting in the gym as well. And we'll be looking to deeper insights into, we'll say, training stuff for muscle growth across a week as well. So it's kind of building all the last few episodes together. So look, thanks again for tuning in, and hopefully I can get back into a bit more of a routine with these podcasts, and especially if you'd like to hear more of them as well, like, just let me know, because that's what kind of gives me the drive to do them. And until next time, chat to you soon. Bye bye.